So now we've kind of known more about religion, more about each. So it's, we know what the religion is about. So let's know what the religion is not about. So the next question, I'll just start from that end. What are the biggest misconceptions associated with our religion?
So the biggest misconception, I've seen this question before and spent some time thinking about it, and it's quite a challenging one. Because do I answer it personally or do I answer it in terms of all the diversity? One of the first misconceptions is that Christianity is one homogenous thing. I think it's a very, very diverse religion. Even within a church, for example, like the Roman Catholic Church, you have Marxist liberation theologians in South America campaigning for social justice and verging on supporting revolution against the authoritarian powers there. And then on the other hand, you have in other parts of the world Roman Catholic leaders who are very conservative and very much comfortable with being used to prop up authoritarian regime. So I would put to you that there's very wide diversity within. I've just given the Catholic Church as an example. Within my own church, the Presbyterian Church, there are the Presbyterian Church in the United States and in Scotland at present is comfortable ordaining gay men and women equally to positions of leadership within the church, whereas the Presbyterian Church of Ireland took a very public stand against the equality referendum that we just had last year. So even within the Presbyterian Church in the world, we're very closely linked to Scotland, there's this huge diversity. So the misconception is that Christianity is one thing. In fact, it's a diversity. And I would like to say I cherish that diversity. Homogeneity would be wrong. And to me, the diversity is a good thing. So when we say Christian, it's not just Protestant Catholic. That simplistic dualism is sort of passé from 400 years ago. There's a lot more nuances of diversity. The second thing I think is some people perceive that the Bible perhaps is to be taken as a literal book, and this came across in the questioning earlier when you were asking about Adam and Eve and the world made in 6 days, and I think that's a very large misconception of Christianity. To be graphic about it, unless the person advocating that they take the Bible literally has one hand, then they're probably not taking it literally. It's very clear, Jesus tells us that if your hand sins against you, to cut it off. So as we know, as we've just heard, that the heart is defunct. As we've just heard Dr. Hamza tell us that all our hearts our hearts are not perfect. We are imperfect human beings. This is a fact of life. I think many of us would all agree with that. So, and this is not something that any amount of discussion is going to change. Tomorrow we will still be imperfect human beings. And my point is that in the Bible, the words Jesus tells us that if your hand sins against you, cut it off. So the folk that tell you about the literal interpretation of it are simply being disingenuous. They're being not characterized by integrity, because they're taking some parts literally, because those parts support the authoritarian structures of the institutions they want to maintain and they want to support, and institutions feel afraid and frightened if their tenets of their religion are in some way challenged by this more poetic and more diverse interpretation of religion. So those are the two I leave you. One, we're diverse, and two, it's not a literal interpretation of the Bible. Right. I'll just pass on to
Well, I think the greatest misconception with humanists and atheists is that we can have no moral values, no ethics. Everyone says, oh, you're an atheist, how could you lead a decent life? And, I would obviously argue that that's absolute rubbish. I think most people could probably think of very religious people who did awful things and very irreligious people who did wonderful things. And, that's a vast generalization, but I think that's true. But I think that things are changing, and I suppose it's one of the things that I try to do. And it's rather interesting, because when I've used the term, when I came out as an atheist and a humanist, affairs correspondent in the Irish Times asked me would I do an interview with them, and he printed it in the Irish Times. And my sister phoned me up, and she's married to a Church of Ireland clergyman, and they had been missionaries in Africa. And she phoned me up and she said, look, I don't mind what you believe in or what you don't believe in, but why do you have to go around shouting about it? Which I thought was a bit rich, coming from someone who had been in the mission field in Africa. But anyway, that's that. But I said to her, what I said to her was, the reason I did that was to give other people permission to come out and say that they didn't believe, because I knew lots of people who I suspected didn't believe in God. God, didn't have any religion, but towed the line. In fact, I wrote something down that someone said earlier on, social norms and just following and being sheep. And I'm a member of a tennis club out in Glengarry, which is a very respectable sort of tennis club, mainly Church of Ireland people, because that was its origins. There used to be 2 tennis clubs so that the Protestants wouldn't be the Catholics and they'd marry the right people. And they're only just down the road from us. That's the way it was. But when in fact my wife said to me, goodness, when she saw this piece in the paper, she said, what will they say at the tennis club? And what they said at the tennis club, most of them was, I think that's what I am. Because really, hardly anyone I know believes in God. Hardly anyone I know is religious. I act as a humanist celebrant. I conduct humanist marriage ceremonies. Last year, 1/3 of marriages in this country were non-religious. You know, I'm not trying to sell humanism or atheism or anything like that. But, you know, Ireland was always thought of as a deeply religious country. The Isle of Saints and Scholars, we used to call it. And virtually everybody was Roman Catholic, and if you weren't Roman Catholic, you were Church of Ireland. Almost, it sounds more or less how it was. But now we have a situation where 1/3 of couples choosing to get married choose to get married in a non-religious ceremony, and it's going up and up and up. I mean, in 1996 it was 6%. So it's going up very fast, and I think that it will continue to. And I think that as people think more, they will realize that they can lead a perfectly normal and compassionate and ethical life without being religious. But I think the big misconception has been that you couldn't do that, and I hope that's changed.
Right, thank you for that, and I'll just pass it on to the next speaker.
Yes, I think there's a whole load of misconceptions concerning Islam. We live in interesting times, which is actually a Chinese curse, being we live in interesting times. So, no, it doesn't mean that we're cursed, but maybe our intellects have been cursed because many of us are sheep and we just follow what the Fox News narrative tells us. And that's just the nature of the human being, so we don't blame them. But what we have to do is, we have a job as Muslims to articulate what is the case for our tradition, not just to be victims. Victimhood is a pathology, it's a disease, because you point the finger and it basically saying that they have the power to control the relationship between you and yourself, and you're powerless. It's a very disempowering position. I don't think it's a prophetic methodology to basically blame others all the time and to be a victim. It's extremely disempowering. So we have stuff to do, we've got a job to do, guys, right? So we have to show to people that Islam is rational, because its intellectual foundations are rational. It's not only intuitive, but we have good reasons to believe in the divine reality, good reasons to believe in prophethood, good reasons to believe in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are all grounded in our rational tradition. We have more than 1,000 years of scholarship that articulates rational arguments for this, which is in our tradition itself, from the verses of the Quran and the prophetic statements. We need to revive this in a modern age. And we also have to show to people that Islam is also very spiritual. We lost that sometimes. People think that Islam is very mechanical. It's based on do's and don'ts, based on, headbutting the floor 5 times a day. Yeah. But we have to show the inner dimensions of these things, which was part of our tradition in the first place. The concept of taqwa, God consciousness, the concept of dhikr, the remembrance of God, the concept of reciting the Quran, the concept of, giving sadaqah and charity, the concept of ikhlas, sincerity, the purification of the heart, in accordance with the Quran and prophetic traditions. Very deep spiritual stuff, right? Because essentially Islam is about the relation between you and Allah and you and creation. And we focus on our relationship between ourselves and Allah, it fixes everything else. We forget that sometimes. It's not in our mannerisms, it's not in our kind of narratives, it's not in our, kind of discourse. So we have to revive that. We have to revive that as Muslims. We show the spiritual side, which is not a new age thing, it's part of our tradition. That's the irony, yeah? So there's the violent aspect. We have to appreciate that Islam deals with human affairs. Islam is not a religion of peace, right? Islam is a religion of life. So it deals with war, it deals with peace, it deals with everything. And we should teach people how Islam deals with war in a very compassionate way, in a very practical way. You know, if you read the ethics of war in the Islamic tradition, you'd be like, we need to replace this. We need to replace the Geneva Convention with what Islam is. Because it's very, very new. You can't harm trees. You can't kill people with fire, which means you can't have nuclear weaponry. My view is that Islam forbids nuclear weaponry, for example. Obviously, war is the worst thing to happen, but it's life. We don't believe in turning the other cheek, because it means you have no cheeks left. If you have to defend people, then sometimes you just have to, after diplomacy, and this is well known in liberal discourse, secular discourse, Article 51, right, of the UN Charter says every individual collective has a right to defend itself. We believe in defending ourselves, okay? This is an Islamic ethic. We have crazy people who are taking this a little bit further these days, right? But we have to show them that Islam is not a violent tradition. It's a tradition of spirituality, of loving Allah, loving the Prophet Muhammad, peace, and by that virtue, having compassion for everybody. And we have ethics for certain things. We can revive what our classical tradition tells us about this. And when people read into it, wow, it's very new, it's very human, right? It's very relevant. We need to re-establish this because we have young kids who don't know nothing about the tradition, and they just go run away with a few verses and they think they know Islam, and that's a big problem. So the spiritual aspect, rational aspect of violence, and I think the final thing is that people sometimes may see Islam as not very compassionate. But we have to understand that the role of the Prophet Muhammad, upon him be peace, was set down as what? As a rahmah. The Quran says that he was sent as a mercy to all the worlds, to everyone that exists. And this mercy was even to animals. We know the famous story of a prostitute who fed gave water to a thirsty dog. She was sent to paradise. This is the prostitute, right? And that's why Islam tells us, don't judge people, you don't know what's going on in their heart, you see. So, even to animals we have to be compassionate.
How do you know she was sent to paradise?
Because the Prophet was. So, that's the irony of that question, which I think is a good question, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to belittle it, but the irony is, sometimes when people believe in evolution, I'm not denying evolution, by the way, I'm not denying that. What I'm trying to say is, when I ask them though, why do you believe in it, they know nothing about the science. Nothing. I asked Professor Lawrence Krauss in the debate I had with him, do you believe in evolution? Yes, I do. Have you done all the experiments yourself and understand the science?
Have to do it.
1 second, man. Take a joke, yo. I want to finish my point. I know you don't have to, but what I want to show to you more is that a lot of our knowledge is based on testimony, the say-so of others. Like for many of us who've never been to China, we believe it exists because of testimonial evidence. And even there's a possibility of going there, but that's still based on testimonial evidence. So if you study epistemology, the science of the study of knowledge, you see that key source of knowledge is other people say so. So for me to say that the Prophet told us is actually epistemologically valid. That was my point. Anyway, so just to finish, we have a compassionate tradition. The Prophet Muhammad, he said that Allah is merciful, and we should be merciful to others as well. If you don't show mercy, you won't be shown mercy. Be merciful to the creatures on earth, and the one above the heavens and the earth will show mercy to you. Allah is kind and compassionate. He loves kindness and compassion. He spoke to his wife Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her. Oh Aisha, be compassionate. If there's compassion in something, it elevates it. If you remove it, it degrades it. We have a compassionate tradition we need to revive and speak to people about. It doesn't mean we're too soft, right? Of course not. We have boundaries, like every ethical tradition has boundaries. But I think it's time that Muslims became beacons of light in the secular society that we live in. We can live in such a society as positive role models. And we have a job to do, to articulate rationally to others, not only through our intellectual discourse, which has to be revived, but also through our actions and our behavior. And that's why we're arguing, I'll end on this. If you read the works of Al-Ghazali, the 11th century theologian, on the rights of the neighbor, your hair will turn white overnight. Because it's so profound. Even if a neighbor was planted a tree in his garden, and it happened to branch into your wall and break your wall, I know it's a bit excessive, you should tolerate as best as possible. That's how we are in our tradition. Abu Hanifa, the famous scholar, he took his slipper off once, and some of the dust of his slipper hit the wall of his neighbor, a non-Muslim neighbor. He was so worried. It might sound like spiritual OCD, but he was so worried. He said, what am I going to do? If I take the dust off, I need to take some of the dust off his wall that it belongs to him, therefore removing some of his property. When the neighbor heard this, he became Muslim. He's like, what kind of tradition does this to people? So worried about small little rights of others. And that's why give people their rights, don't care about your rights, Allah will give them to you. And because we are a community now thinking, where's our rights? Forget them. Prophet ﷺ never demanded his rights, ever. He gave other people their rights. And if you do that, if you're good to others, goodness will be shown to you straight away. Allah says, is there any other reward for good other than good? Assalamu alaikum.
I come across most of the time is like when people see Hinduism from a distance, like they see that Hinduism has so many different gods. That's the biggest misconception what people think about Hinduism. Now, as per Vedas and some Vedas, there is no idol or there is no murti of God. These murtis, this idolism, these all came from the Quranic stories which were the explanation of Vedas, and people took those stories and as gods. Now, God has so many qualities which is incomprehensible by human mind. So basically everybody prays for only one God, which is the immutable, omniscient God. But they may choose a different quality of the God to meditate or pray about it. So there are different qualities of the God which you see in different idols that was part of the Quranic stories. But as far as the basic is concerned, there is only one God, and which is the Creator and Preserver of all of us.
All right. I'll just move on to any questions from the audience actually.
Words about the role of belief in the postmodern society. However, all these views are just tackling